The Memphis Grizzlies have a decision to make this offseason. After a couple of years of being atop of the Western Conference and riding with these young guns and core that they've had, teams have started to pass them with going deeper into their rosters and making bigger moves to where the Memphis Grizzlies, a team that has been dealing with injuries the last couple of seasons and maybe some coaching discrepancies, has kind of fallen. In this offseason, I truly do believe they have one ultimate decision to make, and that is going to be key for what position they decide to go into. So we're going to be deciding and breaking down the Memphis Grizzlies in today's offseason breakdown. If you do enjoy the content, make sure to let me know down below in the comment section your thoughts on the Memphis Grizzlies, if I did them justice, or if I had completely tore them down and did the complete opposite of what Grizzlies are going to be doing this offseason. Once again, if you do enjoy the content, definitely check out the other videos in the playlist, as we've already looked at a bunch of teams already on their offseason breakdowns so far. Without further ado, let's dive in and let's explore the Memphis Grizzlies. So like I mentioned, the Grizzlies, I believe, are in a little bit of a difficult situation here, kind of similar like a lot of other teams. They're at basically crossroads of what they're willing to do and to kind of get better. If we want to look at the Grizzlies this year, finished 48-34, so, very solid in the Western Conference. Did finish, tied for 7th, but the Warriors did hold that tiebreaker over them. They ultimately finished with the 8th seed in the Western Conference, where they took on the Oklahoma City Thunder and were swept in the first round. Now, the Thunder obviously had a great roster. Grizzlies had just fired their head coach like a couple weeks before the playoffs had even started. So that was obviously a little bit of a hindrance as well. But dealing with injuries and just having some young guys on this team trying to build this core, the Grizzlies haven't been able to take that leap. And they've been able to find some great young pieces, some diamonds in the rough that have been able to help with their injury-riddled seasons. Guys like G.G. Jackson, Vince Williams, Jay Huff, and Scottie Pippen, and they've been able to even pass some guys in this rotation that have been key instrumental pieces. But ultimately, the core of, and even Jalen Wells, but even the core of Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson hasn't been able to get it done. And I truly do believe the Grizzlies will ask themselves this question: in which direction are they going to be leading this team with as the number one option? Is it going to be a guy in Ja Morant, or is it going to be a guy in Jaren Jackson? And we'll get into that discussion just in a little bit. But the Grizzlies, no first-round pick this year once again, like similar teams that we've just been discussing in the recent videos. I do not have any draft predictions for them at pick 56. I do expect them to get someone that they will probably bring on a two-way contract, and with my guess with how great the Grizzlies' development has been over the last couple of seasons, they will be once again probably a diamond in the rough for this team, making some key impacts in a year or two down the road. With the Grizzlies being at $148 million and underneath the salary cap, it gives them a lot of flexibility in free agency. With that being said, though, they have key free agents in Santi Aldama, Luke Kennard, and even a guy in Marvin Bagley who made some key impacts late in the second half of the year. And they also have this big extension looming on Jaren Jackson and Ja Morant, and that's ultimately why those conversations are going to have to be held this offseason. Now, the Grizzlies did go in and hire their interim head coach that was brought in for the team after the firing of Taylor Jenkins, and this team will be going into the direction under his new leadership already. So once again, let's dive in and let's explore what the Grizzlies could do, potentially looking on the open market this offseason, looking at their potential guys that they could be traded. So let's get into the discussions. Let's look at the two key guys, like I mentioned, Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. First off, we'll start off with Ja. Obviously, being the number 2 overall pick, was supposed to come into Memphis and really change that culture and be that number 1 guy. When a guy in Jaren Jackson was drafted, he was projected to be a solid defensive player, but his offensive game clearly had to develop outside of the low post. With Ja Morant, he was coming in with all of those red-hot exclamation points of being that dynamic guard for this Grizzlies team, and he really showcased that he was able to do that. But the Grizzlies have been able to show, with Ja Morant dealing with injuries over the course of his career with Memphis for multiple seasons and dealing with suspensions and stuff like that, that they can still handle their own and be really solid without Ja Morant. They had a guard in Tyus Jones a couple seasons ago who went and moved on, but he was a great, valuable backup point guard. They really stepped up into that rising role for them, and it's kind of clear and evident that the core with Desmond Bane and a guy in Jaren Jackson Jr. could really thrive potentially without a guy in Ja Morant. And that's where it really does question on, do you want to give him this extension, or do you look to potentially trade to move off of him to get a better package? Now, when discussing Jaren Jackson Jr., like I mentioned, when he was drafted out of Michigan State, he was viewed as one of those really key defensive pieces and low post scorers, but obviously had to develop some of his offensive game, and Jaren Jackson has had that ability to do so, with being the number 1 option for the Memphis Grizzlies the last season, absolutely showcasing that he can be that dominant front court piece on both sides of the ball. In my personal opinion, I think a fit with Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. is a little bit of a better direction for the Memphis Grizzlies, and it is a smarter extension for them to ink up in the long term, all due to the fact that Ja Morant has had some uncertainties with injuries. Now, Jaren Jackson has had them too, but I do believe Ja Morant has been more inconsistent with that, and I feel like at this point, Jaren Jackson Jr. has proved to you guys over at Memphis to be that cornerstone piece that you really want to invest in and develop. Adding, obviously, and keeping a guy in Desmond Bane as well on the perimeter to help when he is in the low post to kick out and pass out for shooting attempts from three-point range, and will also benefit the Memphis Grizzlies. And I really think finding some key role players and or another star that really does complement these two guys could be that direction. So ultimately, in my opinion, I'm going to be siding with trading Ja Morant and extending a guy in Jaren Jackson Jr. and keeping him for the long term. But I want to know what you guys think. Who would you guys decide between these guys? Now, another trade piece that I think could be on the market for the Memphis Grizzlies is John Konchar. He is on like an $8 million deal, I do believe, or like a $7 million deal. And once again, these young guys for Memphis have seemingly passed him in the ranks. Scottie Pippen Jr. looked fantastic as a backup point guard. G.G. Jackson and Vince Williams have looked better on the wing. And Jay Huff has obviously looked better in the front court. Now, Jalen Wells has also passed a guy on John Konchar. So once again, Konchar has really found himself making some decent amount of money on a team that he's not really playing that much. And there's going to be some teams open with some salary cap. I could see a team like Brooklyn being interested in a guy like John Konchar, even if they didn't keep the contract for the long haul and did reroute him at some point with his tenure there. Once again, they are a team that can take on contracts, and contracts could seemingly easily fit in. If Memphis wants to get a pick in return or some sort of asset back, they can obviously invest in that. But obviously, Konchar's time seems to be really evaporating in Memphis as his defensive skill set, once again, has been passed by these young guys. And I do ultimately think he could still help and impact a team. But for $8 million for a Grizzlies team, when you have guys that are rookies making more impact than him, it's just not necessary. And then ultimately, I don't know if it's going to be this offseason, but with the Memphis Grizzlies having so many young guys, Vince Williams and G.G. Jackson are going to be key guys to really look at for this Grizzlies team when looking at consolidating to going out and getting that wing, because the Grizzlies have been linked to these wings over these last couple seasons, having interest in Mikal Bridges, having interest in Jimmy Butler at the trade deadline, and even having interest in Kevin Durant when his name was thrown around the trade deadline last trade deadline. But the Grizzlies would ultimately have to move some of these young pieces to do so. And with the Grizzlies looking to extend Jaren Jackson, having Desmond Bane on this contract, and looking to bring back some free agents as well and still be relevant in the Western Conference, eventually these contracts are eventually going to creep up on the Grizzlies, and they're going to be forced to either have to pay one of these guys or lose one of these guys in free agency. And that's where it comes to the point for me for Memphis, where eventually I do think after making a trade for Ja Morant and maybe even bringing back a guy in Tyus Jones as that point guard to really work alongside Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson, you can look for an upgrade, maybe not even this offseason, but when the next disgruntled star comes or in a future offseason, to really add at that wing department to really bring in that standout guy to pair alongside Jaren Jackson and Desmond Bane to really complement this team. Now, once again, one of these guys in G.G. Jackson and or Vince Williams could grow into that, and we could realistically see that with Memphis, with them, once again, dealing with injuries and being some younger prospects. If Memphis is going to cash in on anybody with some high potential upside, these are the two guys that I think teams would be calling about for the Grizzlies. So those players that I think that the Memphis Grizzlies could trade, I think Jalen Wells has improved himself to obviously be a standout guy on this roster as another young piece. Desmond Bane doesn't seem like he'll be the one to be traded off of this roster from the Memphis Grizzlies, unless because they still value his three-point shooting, as he is one of the only three-point scorers on this team. But once again, we'll dive in and we're going to look at some free agents here. Like I mentioned, no draft picks, as they don't have a first-round pick. I'm not looking at pick 56 for my Memphis Grizzlies pick. I still, like I said, still think he'll be a diamond in the rough for them on a two-way contract. But let's look at two key free agents for the Memphis Grizzlies this offseason and how it could really affect what they go out and pursue out there on the open market. So the key guy for the Grizzlies this offseason is going to be Luke Kennard. As like I mentioned, Desmond Bane is one of the key shooters for this team, but a guy in Santi Aldama and Luke Kennard, are those two other possible shooters that are going to be out on the open market. So first, we'll look at Santi Aldama. Santi Aldama is going to command, I think, a decent market out there in free agency. He is a solid spacing power forward who, once again, will complement a lot of players and pieces that are looking to rise and win, teams with cap space. And I think a team like the Pistons would definitely be intrigued by a guy in Santi Aldama if they could not swing big in the big center market here in free agency. But Aldama pretty solid scorer and stretch guy for the Memphis Grizzlies. Alongside Jaren Jackson, he works out very solid as well, and putting Jaren Jackson in small ball 5 lineups, giving Zach Edey a break. And I do think for the Memphis Grizzlies, this should be one of the key guys that they do look to bring back, and that's why I do think trading a guy like John Morant or something like that, or Jaren Jackson, if whatever one you want to decide, to bring back Santi Aldama is once again key, because he is a vital role player for this team. Luke Kennard as well. Last offseason was brought back in late. The Memphis Grizzlies had to make a trade at some point in free agency, like late July, early August at some point, to then bring back in Luke Kennard to their team, as he was a sought-out free agent. We wanted to go back to Memphis, but Memphis didn't have the roster spot to kind of bring in Luke Kennard, right? We all remember that. Kennard, once again, solid scorer on the wing for the Grizzlies, something that they do need off the bench, specifically with Desmond Bane being their really primary scorer and shooter from three-point range in the starting lineup alongside Jalen Wells. I do think Kennard isn't as valuable to the Grizzlies as much as Santi Aldama is, as I do believe Aldama at that power forward position is more of a position of need for the Memphis Grizzlies in that big man department, needing a stretch and scoring guy, where for Luke Kennard, you could find that maybe more on the open market or potentially in a trade down the line to really boost you by adding another three-point scorer. But Kennard has played for the Grizzlies these last couple of seasons, has been, a very great fit for the team, and also has, once again, played there multiple seasons, has liked playing there. It's not like this Grizzlies team's like, oh yeah, no, we're just bringing him back because we want to and there's no one better. They actually like this guy. So I do see the sides coming to a mutual agreement potentially this offseason, specifically if they do strike out and lose Santi Aldama, because they'll definitely need that shooting at some point this offseason. The Memphis Grizzlies are target Aldama over Kennard, but ultimately I wouldn't be as surprised if Kennard came back and Aldama did leave. So that's what we had to talk about for the Memphis Grizzlies today. I really do appreciate all your guys' support, and let me know down below in the comment section if you guys agree with the moves that I said for the Grizzlies this off season. Once again, very exciting, intriguing team. One of the Western Conference that I'm not a huge fan of, but I'm definitely interested in with their direction. I like some of the sort of players they do have, and having a bunch of these young guys is definitely interesting and intriguing to see how they can look to develop for the future for this team. And I think this team can really be on the rise in this Western Conference. Once again, one by staying fully healthy, but two, really finding out who that number one star is and building a team around him. Is it Ja or is it Jaren Jackson? That's the main question for the Grizzlies this offseason. But once again, thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode on these offseason breakdowns. If you did enjoy the content, please hit the subscribe button, as it really does mean a lot. Trying to do these videos for you guys every single day, looking at every team's offseason, and then once the draft, trade rumors, trades start to heat up, we're going to be breaking down, looking at that, and covering the NBA going into the season on the channel. So if you do enjoy the content, once again, leave your support. I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, and peace out.